We have a wonderful heritage here in Britain of having some of the finest church buildings in the whole of the world, and none more so than my postcard today, which is from the city of Gloucester, and we're at Gloucester Cathedral. Phil, why did Gloucester deserve a magnificent building like this? Why didn't it go to Cheltenham or Bristol or somewhere like that?
Well, I think that really because Gloucester was here at that time. Being in the west of England, I think there was a need to establish a place of the English church far to the west, whereas to try and offset the establishment of the Celtic churches in Wales, I think there was this little bit of power and influence needed to be placed in this part of the country. There was obviously a community here, and of course the geography of Gloucester on the River Severn, the lowest crossing point of the river from England into Wales, made it a very important place to put a church. And the first one was established here in 679 by King Osric, who established a minster church and had a community of monks and nuns within that church itself. And that church continued, although it was rebuilt several times, right through until the Norman Conquest.
A very long time. And
yes.
His tomb is in there, isn't it?
Osric, yes, he is buried here. He was obviously buried in the original church, but when this church, or the second church, the Norman church, was built, his remains were reinterred in this church.
And does he hold in his hand a replica, a small
yes.
Gloucester Cathedral?
That's right, a small building holding, sort of clutching it to his chest, just to signify that he was in fact the founder of a church.
Now we know that cathedrals are places of worship, but very often they are places of history too. Is Gloucester amongst those memorable places?
Very much so indeed. Gloucester in the medieval period was a royal town, and this meant that the king was a regular visitor here to Gloucester. They often came at Christmas time, which was the tradition set up in the Saxon period, carried on by William the Conqueror. So the royal court would assemble at Gloucester on a regular basis, and of course they would often visit this particular church as well, the Abbey Church. And so, yes, it became a very important place indeed.
And what about specific events?
Specific events in that we had the coronation of Henry III here, which is the only coronation to have taken place outside of Westminster since the Norman Conquest. Henry needed to be crowned quickly following the sudden death of King John, so he was brought to the nearest royal town at that time, which was Gloucester. There happened to be a papal representative in the area who could then officiate at the coronation itself. So actually Henry was crowned here, right here in the Abbey.
Magnificent cloisters.
Beautiful.
I don't think I've seen any as, well, wondrous as these when you walk through them.
Yes.
And the vaulting?
Vaulting is absolutely superb. But the fan vaulting, I think this is the earliest known example of that type of vaulting in the country. Generally mass-produced, each piece is identical, so they could actually form a factory, if you like, to make these sections for the vaulting itself, but all put together probably towards the end of the 14th century. We see them today in a very fine condition with this wonderful stonework, but originally there's an indication they were actually painted bright red, as much of the church was in fact decorated in that way.
The great east window here at Gloucester Cathedral. Interestingly enough, it commemorates the battle scenes and the victory at Crécy. So the parallel is drawn when war was declared in 1939 at the beginning of the Second World War. It was obvious to save this beautiful window, this historic heritage of the land. It should be taken down panel by panel, piece by piece, and labelled and hidden away, so if the bombs dropped on this fair city, this would not be destroyed. So as each panel was taken down, each piece, it was labelled. It was taken away from here and buried at a Cotswold manor house not far from this city. Underground it went. When the war was over, they went back for their pieces of the great east window, and they pulled it all up, and as they took out each panel, all the labels dropped off. Oh no, where are we going to put everything? How's it go? What order? A big jigsaw puzzle. So how are they going to solve the puzzle? Well, quite simply, the chap in charge of this went to a little shop over there in Westgate Street, bought a picture postcard of the Great East Window, what it was like before the war, and before you know it, hey presto, picture postcard, puzzle was solved. And there it is, there for you to see. Now, going back to the cloisters, because we're surrounded more coloured glass, stained glass, but I don't think I've seen anything so intact as this. A quadrangle here.
Yes.
And what would they have been used for? I know we stroll around them looking, but there must have been a purpose for them.
Yes, I think it was for contemplation as a place of repose and reflection. This particular piece here, you just look at the cloister today with its very nicely mown lawns and its little shrubs. There was one incident in 1378 when Richard II decided to hold his parliament here at Gloucester. The reason why he wanted to flee London was because earlier that year he'd imposed the poll tax, and they were worried about riots in London in opposition to the poll tax. So he convened the court here at Gloucester. And he arrived with the whole court. They plonked themselves on the abbey. They then literally filled up the abbey with all the followers from the court. And Parliament then met for about 4 weeks. But in the interim, all the retainers and servants that came with him used this as a playground. And it was said that there was not a blade of grass left when they departed, because they'd been playing ball games and football here in the cloister.
Not much change there,
no,
as they say. No. As you walk around the cathedral, I think for me the most fascinating tomb, and probably part of the cathedral, is that of King Edward II. Mm-hmm. And it is a really quite special,
indeed,
carved monument to a king that really was possibly one of the weakest kings of England, wasn't he?
Yes, it was. Edward was generally regarded as being fairly weak and ineffectual. It was, of course, his downfall was caused by his wife, Queen Isabella, and her relationship with Mortimer. In fact, the plot was hatched in France, and they decided to depose the king. And so as they came back from France, he was deposed in favour of his son, the young Edward, and he was then taken to Berkeley Castle, just a few miles south of Gloucester. And he was kept there in the dungeons there in the hope that he would in fact pass away of natural causes, because they put him next to a particularly filthy drain and had lived in terrible conditions. But it seems the king had a very strong constitution. So eventually they had to put him to death. They hatched this particular plot and he was murdered most foully, and eventually his body was brought here to Gloucester. Incidentally, it was quite interesting that it seems that very few people realised what had happened. They just assumed the king had died a natural death, and Isabella and the young Edward actually attended his funeral here in Gloucester. And it was said that in later years, the young Edward III, was responsible for actually building that wonderful tomb we see today. This wonderful sort of Purbeck marble base with the sort of tall crocketed finials made out of local limestone. And so it was said that he actually built that tomb on his father's grave.
Well, here's a little bit of a surprise for you, and me too, Robert, of Normandy. Now, what do you know about Normans? Who's the first person that springs to mind? William the Conqueror, of course, and this was his eldest son. But he was always hankering for the crown of England because his father, William, actually gave it to his brother, his other son, William, who became William II, William Rufus, who was killed whilst hunting in the New Forest in Hampshire. So why is this brother here? Why is this Norman here? Well, it's said, the theory is, that he was in rebellion with his brother because he wanted the crown of England. And the last place he saw when he was alive was Gloucester. But it was because he was blinded after staying and being at the city of Gloucester. He was actually held prisoner in Cardiff Castle, but by then he was blind. So he was actually laid to rest, it is said, here in Gloucester, because it was the last place he saw. And another little tale, just to add to this. During the time of the Second World War, the throne of the British Crown came to Gloucester and was held in the crypt here at the cathedral. And they actually moved him down as well to the crypt. So the interesting thing there is, many hundreds of years later, his wish almost came true. He almost became King of England because he was that far from the throne of this realm. So if somebody was coming here to Gloucester Cathedral, what would you specifically tell them to look out for, where they couldn't find anywhere else?
Well, I mean, obviously the cloisters, I mean, the wonderful fan vaulting here. And then if you go up into the choir, you see the vaulting in the choir there, which dates mostly from the 14th century. That's the highest medieval vault in the country. It's over 90 feet high from floor to ceiling. And of course, at the end of the choir, what you have is the great east window, this wonderful memorial to the local barons and noblemen who were involved in the Battle of Crecy. That window was put in around about sort of 1349, and it's the largest glass window in the country.
Is it really?
It certainly is, yes.
So, Gloucester Cathedral has some very unique parts to it.
Very much so.
Thanks a
Very much
lot,
so.
Phil.
Pleasure.